The decorative river rock struck the Hendersons' mailbox with a satisfying clang that echoed through Willowbrook Estates at exactly 6:47 am. Karen Whitmore dusted off her manicured hands, her powder blue tracksuit pristine, despite her act of vandalism. "That's what you get for planting petunias instead of approved marigolds," she muttered to herself, already reaching for another stone. Behind her, Mrs. Chen's sprinkler system suddenly erupted like a broken fire hydrant, drenching Karen's perfectly styled blonde bob and sending her scrambling across the sidewalk with a shriek that could wake the dead. Water cascaded down her face, mascara streaming in dark rivulets as she spun around to face the elderly woman standing smugly in her doorway. "Oops," Mrs. Chen said with theatrical innocence. "Motion-activated system. Very sensitive." Karen's jaw dropped as she watched the third catastrophe of her morning unfold behind Mrs. Chen. Through the woman's living room window, she could see her prized HOA newsletter, the one she'd spent 3 weeks perfecting, floating in Mrs. Chen's flooded basement, the papers dissolving into an unreadable soup. Your basement is loading," Karen sputtered, pointing a trembling finger. "I know," Mrs. Chen replied calmly. "Insurance should cover it." Unlike vandalism charges, the threat hit Karen like ice water. She straightened her shoulders, water still dripping from her chin, and summoned every ounce of authority her position as HOA president afforded her. "We'll see about that. I have documentation of at least 14 violations on your property alone. And I have security footage of you throwing rocks at the Hendersons' mailbox," Mrs. Chen countered, tapping her phone screen. Karen's confidence faltered for exactly 3 seconds before her natural stubbornness kicked in. She'd been running Willowbrook Estates with an iron fist for 6 years, and she wasn't about to let one elderly woman with a smartphone take her down. "Fine," Karen snapped, wringing water from her tracksuit jacket. "But this means war." As she stalked back toward her house, leaving wet footprints on the sidewalk, Karen's mind was already spinning with revenge plots. Mrs. Chen thought she was clever, but Karen had something the old woman didn't: the complete backing of the HOA board and a filing cabinet full of neighborhood secrets. What Mrs. Chen didn't know was that Karen's husband Brad worked for the city's water department, and Karen had just remembered seeing some very interesting permits cross his desk last week. Permits that might explain why Mrs. Chen's basement flooded so conveniently. The real question wasn't whether Karen would retaliate. It was how far she'd be willing to go to maintain her kingdom. By noon, Karen had traded her soggy tracksuit for her power outfit, navy blazer, pearl necklace, and the kind of smile that made contractors nervous. She stood in the Hendersons' driveway, clipboard in hand, watching as a city inspector examined their mailbox with the intensity of a crime scene analyst. "Ma'am, this is clearly intentional damage," Inspector Rodriguez said, photographing the dent. "You're saying you witnessed the assault?" "Assault on community property values," Karen corrected, her voice dripping with practiced outrage. "Mrs. Chen has been terrorizing this neighborhood for months. The flooding was just her latest escalation." The inspector looked confused. "I thought you said she threw the rock." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She'd gotten so carried away with her narrative that she'd forgotten her own lie. What I meant was..." "Karen Whitmore?" A new voice interrupted. She turned to see a young man in military fatigues approaching, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. Staff Sergeant Mike Henderson, the Hendersons' son, home on leave, and someone Karen had specifically hoped to avoid. "Sergeant Henderson," she said, her authority voice faltering slightly. "I was just filing a report about the vandalism to your parents' property." "You mean the vandalism you committed?" Mike's voice was quiet, but carried the kind of authority that comes from leading troops in combat zones. "Mrs. Chen showed me the footage." Inspector Rodriguez perked up. "There's footage?" Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her perfectly pedicured feet. "That footage is... It's taken out of context. As HOA president, I was simply testing the structural integrity of..." "Mom," Mike's voice cut through her explanation like a knife, "I know exactly who you are." The color drained from Karen's face. Mike continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're the woman who sent my parents 17 violation notices while I was deployed. The one who tried to fine them for displaying a Support Our Troops banner. That banner exceeded the approved dimensions by 6 inches. Mike stepped closer. 6 inches was worth harassing my parents for 8 months. Inspector Rodriguez was scribbling furiously on his pad. The Hendersons emerged from their house, drawn by the commotion, and Karen realized she was surrounded by hostile faces. "This is ridiculous," she declared, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "I am the elected representative of this community's standards. Every action I take is for the betterment of property values and—" "Save it for the judge," Mike interrupted. He turned to the inspector. "I'd like to file a counter-complaint for harassment and destruction of property." Karen's carefully constructed morning was crumbling faster than her mascara had in Mrs. Chen's sprinklers. But as she looked around at the gathering crowd of neighbors, some sympathetic, others openly hostile, she realized something that sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't just about rocks and flooding anymore. This was about 6 years of accumulated grievances, and Mike Henderson's return had given the neighborhood something it hadn't had before: a leader who wasn't afraid of her. The real war was just beginning. The emergency HOA board meeting that evening was supposed to be Karen's moment of redemption. Instead, she found herself standing in the Hendersons' backyard, staring at the most spectacular disaster of her presidency: her own in-ground pool, somehow relocated and installed in the wrong yard. "How does a pool get delivered to the wrong address?" Board member Janet Murray asked, her voice pitched high with disbelief. Karen's contractor, Tony Ritchie, shifted uncomfortably under the patio lights. "The work order said 1247 Maple Lane. This is 1247 Maple Lane. My address is 1247 Maple Lane." Karen shrieked. "This is 1274. Mike Henderson, who'd been watching the circus with obvious amusement, finally spoke up. "Actually, Mom, we had the house numbers changed last month. City ordinance. They needed to be more visible from the street." He gestured to the new, larger numbers on his parents' house. "We're 1247 now. Mrs. Whitmore's house is 1274. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hum of pool filters and Karen's strangled gasp. You planned this," she whispered. Mike's smile was all innocence. "I planned to help my parents update their house numbers for safety compliance. The pool delivery was fortuitous timing." Karen spun toward her contractor. "Fix this. Move it back." Tony shook his head. "Lady, that pool is installed. Plumbing, electrical, the works. Moving it would cost more than building a new one, assuming the Hendersons agree to let us tear up their yard again." "Which we don't," Mrs. Henderson added cheerfully. "We've always wanted a pool." Karen felt her world tilting. 6 months of planning, $30,000, and countless arguments with Brad about the expense, all for a pool that was now providing entertainment for her enemies. "This is theft," she declared. "I'm calling the police." "About what?" Janet Murray consulted her clipboard. The pool was installed according to the work order address. The Hendersons didn't steal anything. But they manipulated. Karen's voice trailed off as she realized the elegant simplicity of what had happened. No laws broken, no rules violated, just a perfectly legal game of chess that she'd lost without even realizing she was playing. Mike Henderson stepped forward, his expression softening slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've spent 6 years making my parents' lives miserable over arbitrary rules. Maybe it's time to consider that being a good neighbor is worth more than being right all the time." Karen stared at him, then at the pool, then at the gathering of neighbors who'd come to witness her downfall. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't experienced since taking over the HOA: genuine uncertainty about her next move. "This isn't over," she said quietly, but even she wasn't sure what this meant anymore. As the board meeting officially adjourned and neighbors began drifting away, Karen remained standing by the pool, her reflection wavering in the chlorinated water. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, and new questions about what kind of person she wanted to be. But tonight, for the first time in 6 years, Karen Whitmore wasn't sure she had all the answers.